As the war continues, one vital piece of military equipment is becoming increasingly depleted at Russian storage bases, and that is towed artillery. At some bases, you can see there's entire sections that are now completely gone. So we, again, gathered all the bases, got the latest satellite imagery, much newer than you'll see on Google Earth, and put together all the data to get a better picture. Speaking of data, take back your own personal data with our sponsor, Incogni. There's an entire unseen world out there that exists simply to collect and build a database of your information. Your name, even alias, social security numbers, logins and passwords, home address, location history, online activity, and much more. And in most countries and cases, this is all legal, and it's a quickly growing industry. 2023 alone saw a 72% increase from the previous high. One time on a date, a girl I met told me my whole name and address, plus every address and place I ever lived and family members. Turns out she got all that information just from my phone number. Now, in my case, she did that when meeting anyone for the first time, out of safety. But all that information is out there. And this was just the data that they give away for free. What Incogni does is not only issue removal requests, which work, but data brokers will just start collecting again. Incogni has an automated system to repeatedly issue those requests. All you have to do is create an account, say whose data you want to protect, and they do the rest. And they have family plans as well as individual. So go over and check them out. Use my code, Cabal, or use the link down in the description, and you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Again, Incogni. Normally, here is where I'll do a preamble explaining how important artillery is, especially towed artillery, but I'll save you from that this time. Suffice it to say that while self-propelled artillery is generally superior, given its mobility and a degree of armored protection, they cost much more, often 5 to 10 times as much. They also require more supplies and maintenance to support their use in the battlefield. So, despite being around for centuries, towed artillery is still extremely important. These artillery storage depots are spread across numerous bases. And again, it was some big help getting some of the imagery from Mark Krutov over at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And again, for the sake of time, since there's so many of them, I'm just going to highlight 2 of these depots. Out of the 19 total bases, just these 2 alone contain nearly 2/3 of all the remaining stored towed artillery. The first is Chuche. This base has a long, interesting history. I found a declassified CIA document from 60 years ago of the base. In the document, it is just listed as an ammunition depot. Nowhere does it mention chemical weapons. Either they didn't know, or they kept that out of the report. However, we now know that those Chuche storage buildings reportedly held roughly 5,600 tons of various chemical agents and nearly 2 million munitions. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US and their allies worried about the safety and security of the massive arsenal of weapons of mass destruction the Soviets had. So they created the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program to both destroy and then secure the remaining stockpile. Chuche was a major part of that. Over the next 25 years, billions of dollars were spent here alone. Most of that money went to building a massive disposal facility. Due to its remote location in central Russia, this became a massive undertaking, which included building up the infrastructure to bring in construction materials, as well as building a railroad that connected to the storage base to transport the chemical agents. The base itself didn't actually start storing artillery pieces here until most, if not all, of the chemical weapons had been removed. There's a gap in imagery, but in 2000, nothing except a few trucks. In 2003, you could see a section being cleared to prepare for storage. Then in 2013, we see hundreds of pieces of artillery. By 2016, thousands had been brought to the site, which brings us up to our count. I was able to get this image that I'm real excited to be able to show you. It's from the 9th of September, which when I bought it was just 3 days old. And not only that, but it's the highest resolution image ever taken of the base publicly at 30 centimeters. The image you see on Google Earth from 2 years ago is closer to 60. That might not sound like much, but again, that's roughly double in length and double in width, so 4 times more pixels. And that difference really shows. Here we can see the base has seen a huge drop, with some areas completely gone. However, there are some other areas that have increased where likely they were consolidating those pieces from other areas. But in total, the base now has almost 2,000 less pieces of artillery than it did before the war began, from 4,839 down to just 2,909. And that's still a big number. It alone accounts for nearly 50% of all towed artillery Russia still has remaining in storage. And the second base is actually less than 200 kilometers away, the 80th Arsenal located just outside Yekaterinburg. As you can see, it still has a lot of pieces left. However, there are sections completely gone since before the war. In total, it's dropped from 2,224 to 1,767, or about a 20% drop. And finally, the total numbers. Here they are. Our total pre-war count, there were some 14,486 pieces of towed artillery of all types. Now, it's down to just 6,134. It should be noted though that a decent number of those come from mortars, which, depending on different definitions, might not be counted. So if we ignore them, it's 11,876 down to that same 6,134, as we haven't seen any remaining mortars. Most of them were stored at the 94th in Omsk, but those are all gone now. For the total breakdown of each type, you'll have to check in with HIMARS on Twitter. He put in a massive amount of work on this project, and a huge thanks to him. He's broken them down into each type at each base for pre-war, 2023, and current. He's also broken them down and grouped them by size to get a better and quicker idea of the situation. And you'll have to check his Twitter to get a better explanation of that. But one key takeaway from this is that they're quickly burning through all their larger artillery. While over 50% remain of the small and medium, only about 1/3 remain of those larger ones. And these tend to be the newer, more accurate and capable ones, like the 2A36 and 2A65 built in the 70s and 80s, compared to the much older and less capable 1940s and 50s built D1 and D20 in our medium category. There are several reasons for this. Obviously, they want to pick the best and most capable first. That means pulling those newer pieces from storage when they're replacing losses, or scrapping for spare parts like their barrels, or most importantly, informing new units. Russia has created some 70 new regiments since the war began, and while their compositions vary, if each had one artillery battalion, which normally consists of 18 pieces, that alone would be 1,260 pieces of artillery, and that would account for nearly 22% of the decline in non-mortar artillery that we've seen. And as you can see, a lot of those large artillery pieces here are no longer neatly packed, but scattered about, as if they're beginning to move them, possibly for use. Also, having 1/3 remaining still sounds like a lot. After all, if it took them over 2 years to burn through the first 2/3, it'd seem reasonable to assume that the remaining 1/3 would last at least another year. However, there's a high probability that a lot of those remaining are just junk, and scrap at best. But what this also implies is that as they run out of the newer pieces and have to rely on the older ones, the quality and capability of Russian artillery in Ukraine will decrease dramatically. I mean, some of these, like the D1, was designed and began production all the way back during World War II. Although it is important to note that it will take some time between running out of these somewhat newer equipment and seeing the impact on the battlefield. They have to be prepared, shipped out, sent to units, then lost in combat or worn out from use, before they're replaced with the less capable ones. However, the end result is clear. Russia is going to begin running into a real problem. The real question is if the war and Ukraine will last long enough with sufficient strength to take advantage of that.